of the legislative session is here. I'm Mike McClanahan, and right across the table I have House Republican leader Drew Stokesbary of Auburn. Representative Stokesbary, thank you for your time today. Just if you could encapsulate your major takeaways from the 2024 session to date, what are they?
You know, I think we are finally beginning to restore a little bit of common sense to Olympia. Republicans were able to stop a lot of really bad policies that were going to take Washington in the wrong direction. We passed 3 citizen initiatives. There will be 3 more that go on the ballot. Can't say we have fixed Washington. That's what House Republicans want to do, fix Washington. But we went a long way in terms of not making it worse.
So the initiatives that will be on the ballot this fall, 2 would eliminate major funding sources for various programs. Another would essentially ban any income taxes in the future from any at the state or local level. Some have said that one is not necessary, that the Constitution and or Supreme Court decisions have already sort of done that. What's your take on that?
Well, you know, I think certainly the legislature could, anytime it wanted, pass some form of income tax. The Constitution puts some limits on what that could look like, but it doesn't prohibit it completely. The initiative that we passed now does, and Washington has many crises facing it, one of which is an affordability crisis. And the least we can do is tell our constituents that we're not going to pass an income tax in the next year or 2. And so that's what this initiative does, is ensure that there is not an income tax around the corner that's going to make Washington even more unaffordable for working class families.
So the other 2 specifically would eliminate the Climate Commitment Act and prevent cap and trade in the future in Washington, and would repeal the state capital gains tax. From your perspective, what do you think gives those the best chance of passing?
Well, you know, with respect to the capital gains tax, while it only affects a limited number of Washingtonians right now, the perpetual concern from folks across the state is that taxes never go down and never get limited in terms of applying to fewer people. The legislature only ever makes tax rates go up and apply to more people. And so the concern with the capital gains income tax is that it's just a foot in the door, and eventually it will apply to more and more people, to regular investors who are cashing out their 401k or taking a little bit out for part of their retirement. So that's the concern, is that eventually it is going to apply to regular people. And with regard to the Climate Commitment Act, we just have a fundamental difference of opinion. I think House Republicans and probably most of the state, certainly the 400,000 individual Washingtonians who signed the initiatives, just don't think that Washington drivers should have to pay 50 cents to $1 extra in the cost of gasoline to solve a problem that really isn't of Washington's making, and certainly isn't one that Washington alone can solve. We just don't think working families should pay for the sins of places like China. We should focus on helping the working class, not punishing them because they can't afford to live closer to where their jobs are.
What's your perspective on I want to say it's 1589, the gas utility legislation? We just heard from the speaker who said the goal there is to sort of level out the cost of transition, not eliminate it, but spread it around. What's your perspective?
Well, just like the Climate Commitment Act, the goal is laudable. Of course, we want less carbon. Less carbon is in the atmosphere is better than more carbon. But we shouldn't be doing it by making working Washingtonians pay more out of pocket. 1589 is by far the worst bill that was passed this session. There are House Democrats up and down Puget Sound that will very much regret their vote. The folks who live in the 28th district, say Lakewood University Place, folks who live in the 10th district, say Oak Harbor, they will regret their vote. There are thousands of their constituents that will pay more in gas and electric rates to PSE because of this bill. It is the worst policy we could have passed, and absolutely unfathomable that House Democrats in the Puget Sound would vote for this and think it's a good idea. Again, we should be making Washington more affordable. This bill is going to make the affordability crisis worse.
One issue that has been discussed, but I'm not sure was addressed directly this legislative session, is I'm going to say shortage of public defenders in Washington. Just the overloaded courts, the number of cases in the queue, and then the just lack of available defenders to handle those. So especially with some new guidelines for defense that I want to say Office of Public Defense is maybe looking at moving forward, counties are going to need more of those. What's your perspective on that and the best way to pay for it?
Yeah, you know, that's probably one of the biggest lost opportunities of this session. Not just funding more public defenders, but also not funding more police officers. The first week of session, we heard from the Speaker in her opening remarks to the legislature, and then a couple days later from the Governor in his State of the State response, acknowledging that Washington State ranks 51st of every state in the country in police officers per capita. Every state in the District of Columbia has more police officers per capita than us. And there were ideas, bipartisan ideas, bills from Republicans with Democrat co-sponsors, bills from Democrats with Republican co-sponsors to try to fix this. And one of those actually tied hiring more police officers to hiring more public defenders. So it would be a win-win. You would have more folks enforcing the law, but also more public defenders so that prosecutors could bring more cases and not have such a backlog. Unfortunately, none of those bills move forward, and I think it's a huge lost opportunity. And we need more public defenders because the bad guys do have a constitutional right to a defense. And when those folks are limited, not only are we, subjecting them to some constitutional concerns, but it makes it harder for prosecutors to bring cases. So we need both. We need more police officers. We need more public defenders. We need to restore law and order. We need to fix the public safety crisis facing Washington. And unfortunately, the majority didn't do much in that regard this session.
With respect to housing and renters specifically, this year, bills that would have limited or capped annual rent increases moved further along in the legislative process than I've seen since I've been covering Olympia. And I've heard that there's some interest in bringing that back in the future. What's your perspective on what are deemed the rent stabilization bills?
Yeah, this is rent control, plain and simple. And it sounds great to a lot of folks. It sounds nice. But the problem is it is going to lead to constrained housing supply. The way you lower rents is to build more housing. It's simple supply and demand. Even left-wing Democrats are sort of able to acknowledge that the laws of supply and demand are not some Milton Friedman right-wing fever dream, but just an observation of how the real world works. And so if we want to bring down the price, you can do two things. You can bring down demand or you can raise supply. I don't think bringing down demand by forcing people out of state is a very good idea. I think we should bring down price by raising supply. That means building more housing of all types. Simply capping the price is not going to work. This is what every economics student learns in their very first semester of economics. You got to build more supply. If you just constrain the price, excess will shift other places. So we need to build more supply, and capping rental rates will lead to less supply, less housing being built. So it might be a short-term Band-Aid that helps in the next year or two, but in the medium term, in the long term, it will result in much higher rental housing prices. So it is a false solution. I think it would be very harmful for Washington to go down that path. I'm very grateful that House Republicans, Senate Republicans, and a few key Democrats were able to defeat that bill, and will continue to work hard to do so.
So we've got just a couple of minutes left, so maybe we can do these next questions as quickly as possible. But I want to get your take on the difference in sort of the way the House approaches stuff in the Senate. Sometimes you see legislation advance in one or the other, maybe overwhelmingly pass the House, and then just cold reception in the Senate. What's your take on that?
Yeah, sometimes it is kind of funny to look at a bill that passed one chamber unanimously and the other chamber party lines, or vice versa. But we have different members who have different perspectives. The committee hearings are held separately, and so sometimes you'll get a member who asks a good question, or a witness, person providing testimony that makes a good point, that sort of reorients people's thinking. I think sometimes the Senate has a tradition of having a little more free agency, where members feel a little more compelled to vote their district and vote their conscience. I think that's probably a good thing. One of the downsides to the House, I think, is that there's too much of a tradition of just blindly following party discipline. You saw this with 1589, which we talked about a minute ago. We had votes to stop that bill. There were 14 votes opposing that bill out of the Democratic caucus, but the Speaker spent 7.5 hours twisting arms until she got 5 people to cave and was able to secure the votes to pass that bill. So there is this tradition over in the House of following your caucus leadership, and I think that's to the detriment of Washington State. I wish folks had a little bit more free agency and were willing to vote what they thought was right and what they thought was best for their districts, rather than being subjected to this pressure to just blindly follow their party leadership.
So with just literally under a minute left, what did I not ask you about? What bullet points stand out to you?
Well, again, I'll circle back to where we started. I think this was a great session for House Republicans, a great session for the people of Washington, and a great session for common sense. Some of the worst ideas we've seen in a decade were stopped dead in their tracks, either in the House or in the Senate, and did not become law. This session could have been a lot worse for regular working class Washingtonians. We passed 3 initiatives that 400,000 Washingtonians signed, and we're sending 3 more to the ballot this fall where Washingtonians will get to weigh in.
Well, we're going to have to stop right there. Thank you again very much, House Republican Leader Drew Stokesbary. We appreciate your time today on Sine Die. And still ahead, we will go to break, but when we return, we're scheduled to speak with Democratic Senate Majority Leader Andy Billig. Stay with us.